So how does that translate into the urban economy and urban development? This is fairly straightforward stuff for all economists. India's economy has been growing very rapidly, especially we've seen this massive growth spurt in the mid 2000s. So that's the growth spurt. What you see here is a breakdown by 10 sectors. This is agriculture, so that's the growth. This is the the sectoral breakdown that's there. So this is agriculture. This is a big issue, as I said. Basically, agriculture is now down to about 14% of GDP, and we have at least half the population dependent on that. We have people who work on this question quite strongly in this case. We have manufacturing, which is not moving very much. And this is, of course, the Indian conundrum in terms of development. Unlike China and the classic development model, we have become a service sector, that's everything above that line. We've been a service sector-led economy, and manufacturing is not growing at all. In fact, we have a significant trade deficit with China because Chinese workers, in a sense, are providing all the manufacturing goods that we should be providing our own people, and we're not generating employment as far as we're concerned. What else is actually growing here? Transportation, storage, and communications, that's the internet and the telecom revolution, and of course logistics, which has grown dramatically, maybe not so good in terms of energy utilization, but it's quite important. Trade, which is up here, construction, which is up there, and of course finance and real estate, huge. And that of course employs very low, very few people as far as that's concerned. So this is the output side. This is the rupee GDP side. The interesting thing to look at, and I would encourage you to look at both things at the same time, is the sectoral shares of employment. So this is the sectoral share of employment in agriculture. This is the output. This is the big structural challenge that we have. We're just not able to create enough jobs here. There's an agrarian crisis. We hear about farmer suicides across the country. It's a deep, you can go state by state, and I encourage you, we have some of these states up in different, pretty much all the districts, that's Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, etc. The same diagrams, output, employment, and you see the same thing drilled down state after state after state. This is a serious challenge for us. In some senses, it's a failure of both political imagination and also of policy. So you can see the big mismatch. For example, this is manufacturing that you would expect to have grown most rapidly. And I think the opportunity of urbanization, especially of smaller places, is the opportunity of creating jobs in the manufacturing sector across the country. And whether we talk about balanced regional development or otherwise, this is the core challenge for us in some senses. Other things are being more elastic. Transport is fairly elastic. Construction is not doing too badly, etc. But this, in some senses, is the core structural question that we're having, and we really have to sort this out, I would say, in the next 10 to 15 years. Otherwise, there's no chance in hell that we will have any significant impact on poverty or a whole range of other processes. And cities, especially small places, the 1 lakh plus towns, are at the heart of this, of the answer to this question. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you do the same sort of breakdown, this is a breakdown of urban and rural GDP. These are estimates my colleagues have put together. Essentially what you see is we're about 55% urban and 45% rural. Now this is an interesting thing. This is, the global discourse has also been like this for a long time. We all woke up in 2007-8 when UN Stat said, look, the world is half urban. But that's only the demography. In actual fact, if you look at the long-term numbers, the world became half urban economically in the 1980s, in the middle of all the structural adjustment that was happening all over the world. So this is something that, now that we have the analytical frame, we should start interrogating, because the economic structure in many cases is driving a lot of the opportunities and challenges that we have. So India already is more than a half urban economy. This is what I tell colleagues from Karnataka. Karnataka is close to being a half urban state like Tamil Nadu is, but it's not thinking like a half urban state because its economy is more than half urban. So the lag between the two actually creates the conflict which emerges in the sort of employment space as far as that's concerned. This is the breakdown of the urban GDP. If I look at the structure that's there, you see the whole range of different things. Services are quite important as far as that's concerned. So essentially what we're saying here is urban GDP is big. We're talking about whatever it is, 2.8 lakh crores as far as the urban GDP is concerned. And the growth, especially in the last 7 or 8 years, has been quite high. So what effectively is driving India's economy is 9% mean growth over a 7-year period in the last 2004 to 11. And this is what we have to look at in the future. In fact, all the challenges we have as far as housing, land, water supply, sanitation, etc., are constraints on this happening. I'm not saying this is the only thing that needs to happen, but if this doesn't happen, then both the growth and the redistribution that needs to take place without that has no sort of fundamental basis. Next slide. Okay. Now, when you start looking, and basically what we've done here is we've tried to look at the relationship between employment growth and output growth. And I'll take the example of the construction sector. The construction sector, the size of the bubble in this case corresponds to the size of the output. Fine, that's correct? Sure? Yeah. Size of the output. So this gives you the relative size of the output. Agriculture at about 14%, construction at about 8% or so. What this tells you here is over the 7-year period 2004 to 2011, the construction sector has seen a 12% growth in employment and also something like a 10% growth in output. So if you really wanted to push the country or the region or the state or the urban area that you have this data for in terms of being able to increase output and increase employment, this is a great space to go to. Agriculture is doing very badly, as we know. Agriculture in any case output growth will be low, but employment growth in agriculture in some cases is negative, which means people are moving out of agriculture. We know that's happening in many places. But you need to stabilize that because you have so many people in agriculture, and you have to, and we've done this from green revolution, white revolution, blue revolution, etc., etc. So as you actually start breaking down and trying to understand how particular sectors need to be promoted and supported, we do need to be able to engage with how they're doing with their relative growth as far as employment and output is concerned. And at least to be quite frank about this, we've been quite fixated, I think, in the last 10 years or so on creating entitlements for employment growth. That's what NREGA is about. But putting most of our policy effort in trying to maintain this, but maybe in the wrong sectors. Yeah. So rebalancing of that is, I think, a policy debate that we should sort of open. And the question then, of course, is why is this happening? This is a graph that looks at the employment share. This is all the people that are employed in the country, and this is the labor productivity. This is how much this sector, on an average, as far as per capita is concerned, produces an output. And you can see here very obviously, agriculture is a very, very low productivity occupation. But there are a large number of people who are actually employed in this. On the other hand, so if you look at the relative numbers between agriculture, which is I get 300-400 or so at this side, and finance and real estate at 700, you can see the great differentials that are operating in society. So 1% of employment that's there, creating significant 7-8% of output. So the productivities of labor are much higher in if I go all the way down from the top, finance and real estate, power utilities, mining. This is the reason why mining is a big challenge in some places, transport and communication, other services, trade, manufacturing, construction, agriculture. So understanding how this stepwise function actually works in each location, and of course trying to increase its productivities is the core task that we have to deal with, because it is cities in many cases that can actually structurally improve productivity by providing market linkages, by providing adequate factor inputs, whether it's water or housing or adequate schools or healthcare. We really have to raise the base here significantly, and of course along this whole process. And as we know, much of this is urban. So being able to get the balance between how the relative rate of growth between employment and output, and of course productivity are concerned, are in some senses at the heart of the sort of development debate at the moment, especially as fiscal decentralization or fiscal cooperation or competition, depending on which way you look at it, actually plays itself out. So if we take the same analysis, and I'm just showing it to you for a second, you can see that some states are stuck and others are actually moving. Exactly the same analysis. That's the GSDP, the output at state level. This is the sector share of GSDP. This is the employment share. So you can see Karnataka. This is agriculture in terms of output, agriculture in terms of employment. Deep challenge. And Bangalore is a great opportunity, but it's also a deep part of the challenge here, because Bangalore is creating this growth of output here, but it's not creating that much employment. That is a real challenge. A massive concentrator, a primate city in this state. And when you look at it again, look at the growth rates. Negative growth in terms of employment in agriculture. That big blue dot there. Output growth is a little bit better because some parts of Karnataka are irrigated and do fairly well. And of course, all the way up there, other services. That brown there is the IT sector that some of us actually a part of. So Kerala also similarly, Kerala much deeper decline in agriculture on both sides, a growth of services, but you can see the same mix. Agriculture is in a bad shape on both employment and output growth. Construction is a lead sector. Fine. Kerala has really not made the transition to services. Let's just run through it very quickly. So I'm going to encourage you to look at this because there's district by district analysis that are up on the wall. Maharashtra also similar challenge. Look at Maharashtra's challenges. This is a challenge of Marathwada and Vidarbha. All the challenges we're seeing in Vidarbha is because of this structural change is not taking place as far as that's concerned. That's Punjab also, our lead agricultural state with a fair amount of industrialization. This is industrial output in Punjab. Some growth here. And this is just after the troubles in Punjab because there was a major slowdown as far as that's concerned. Next, Rajasthan. Same structural issues that you see here, and you see construction sector way up at the other end. So as we unbundle these processes, you will get a much better. Odisha also similar kinds of things. This is the mining sector in Odisha. Okay, and I'll just take you in and sort of drill in a minute. Keep going. So if you then actually start drilling down, and this is from a piece of work that we have done with colleagues in Orissa for the government of Orissa, you can actually break this down. This is the same over a shorter period, the growth pattern for Orissa. You can break it down region by region, and here you can see, of course, southern Orissa, KBK, classic area where which many of us again have worked in since the 70s, almost one of the worst developed areas in the country. Look at the differential between northern Orissa, coastal Orissa, where much of the wealth and the population is, and this just in terms of physical output as far as we're concerned. And then when you start breaking it down, you start looking at the employment clusters, you understand why that's actually happening. This is agriculture in Orissa. Negative growth rate, very low employment, very little actual output growth that's taking place. Let's go down a little bit more. Next slide. Yeah, okay, great. So what I was alluding to you earlier is, this is the same map that I showed you of the whole country, now zooming down into Orissa. So what do you see here? What do you see are, this is the density patterns that are there. You can see in the settlement structure, for those of us who are transportation specialists, you can see the networks actually jumping out at you. You can see the corridor development that's there. This is the the railway line that goes from Baleshwar, Bhadrak, Cuttack, all the way down to Chennai. You can see the new railway lines actually building out from here. You can see the cross-ghat linkages that are there. You can actually see the development of Angul, etc. So what I'm saying is, we don't have to run and do lots of primary data analysis before going in and doing stuff. The answers are actually there, and if you're able to zoom into it, you can actually look at how regional development can take place. This is among the more challenged areas in terms of development in Orissa, and you can see here the connectivity and density of settlements are much lower. So the question then is, how do you invest in this? Do you actually take the big aluminum plants in there and get into the major? This is the area where a lot of the big battles are taking place in terms of mining and tribal displacement in this part of Orissa. So how do you connect it out, etc. So what I'm saying is that this analysis allows you to go down and get into some degree of detail of how do you enable the development of small towns, how do you then drill down and looking at what sectors actually enable that process next. Yeah, so same analysis, all the major small towns in Orissa, and you can see the proportion of urbanization, and as you zoom in, then of course you have to change techniques. You start using satellite imagery much more, and you look at the, this is Berhampur, and you look at the urban footprint, you can see actually what's happening. And again, this is standard stuff for those of us who work on regional development. So what I'm saying is, we have the technology and the information in the country at the moment to start doing this stuff. The question is linking the macro with the micro, because eventually it is what's going to happen here in one of the extensions to Berhampur, and your land use planning that's there, and how the housing gets organized and how your water supply is organized, that will determine whether this actually becomes a center which is going to create a lot more employment, if you're looking at employment particularly. So that connection is something that we can do now. It's a lot easier for us to do now than it was earlier, and I think we need to use both the technology and the techniques to actually do this.